Hello, and welcome to this on-demand session from Artlogic Connect, which took place in September 2025. We're so glad you're here. This year's conference welcomed over 4,200 people from across the globe, making Connect one of the largest online gatherings in the art world, a space where our community shared ideas, explored new perspectives, and imagined what's next for the market, a positive, opportunity-filled future. Artlogic is proud to host Connect as part of our mission to support the arts community and help every corner of the art ecosystem thrive. We're delighted to share this session with you so you can revisit the insights, the conversations shaping today's art world, all at your own pace. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started.
Hi, thanks so much. So glad to be with you, dialing in from my obviously very brightly colored and art-filled home in Upper Manhattan. And so glad to be discussing resilience and reinvention in the gallery world, going beyond the headlines. And I know you're not here to see me, so I'm going to jump right into very brief introductions to the two distinguished dealers and gallerists who are joining me. Christiana Ina Kimba Boyle and Nina Johnson. So just to give you a very, very brief introduction to Christiana, she, among other positions, was a director at Loretta Howard Gallery, was assistant to a partner at Lehman Mopin. She's had two stints at Canada Gallery, first as a senior director and later as a partner, in between which she was appointed senior director and global head of online at Pace at the tender age of 28, no less. And there she established Pace Verso, an NFT platform. And now she's launching Gladwell Projects, an independent and nomadic gallery that's launching its second iteration in Harlem in October. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later. And as for Nina Johnson of Miami, she's had a gallery in that city since 2007, an incredible accomplishment by any measure. Launched the gallery just 5 years after Art Basel Miami Beach's first edition there, and is showing in that fair for the first time, if I have my information right, this December. So congratulations on that. And her mission, as she has put it, is to show historically relevant artists not otherwise necessarily being seen in Miami, and also to ensure that the Miami-based artists that she represents have a platform to show their work on an international stage. And I've had a great time reading interviews with both of these women and listening to podcast interviews with them. And so I will leave it at that. There's no shortage of information and insights from both of them out there for you to find. So I'm so happy to be discussing resilience and reinvention. But first, I do, because the session is called Beyond the Headlines, I actually want to talk very briefly about those headlines, because I imagine that we're all thinking about the same sort of headlines, especially as regards the gallery world. We've seen galleries closing and downsizing and merging, and it's auction totals are down. It's no secret that we're in a declining market over the last few years, the size of the art market. And one of my favorite interviewees, the Belgian collector Alain Servet, in the latest edition of the ArtNet Intelligence Report, said very dramatically that he predicts that blood will flow in the streets before the market finds its level. And it's just great as a journalist when somebody says terrific things like that. So thank you. Merci, Alain. But I wonder, you, Christiana, you are starting a new venture in this moment. So obviously you have some faith and some optimism, and Nina, you have survived ups and downs before. And I just wonder, just for a moment, briefly, do you want to push back against those headlines? Do you want to offer some nuance to those headlines? What's your take on the temperature of the market as it's been discussed, Christiana?
I mean, I most certainly would like to push back on the narrative that it's all doom and gloom. I mean, the truth is out there, things have slowed down, but within the art market, it ebbs and flows. It's the natural state of doing business within this industry, as well as any other industry. From my experience and knowledge, the best time for invention and creation is in the moment of downturn. The risks are so low at that point and ingenuity is so necessary. So it's a huge reason why I felt um, this moment was the right moment to kick off Gladwell projects. And it's something that, has been an inception for quite some time. There's been a lot of intentionality behind the creation of Gladwell. But I think within this time in which people are really changing and shifting gears and really thinking about their standing within the market, how they're interacting with artists, and engaging with collectors, um, new invention is needed.
Yeah, great. Nina, thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that, when everyone else is being quiet, it's a good time to make noise. And it's funny, the statement that you referenced. I ran into a friend who's the head of a cancer center down here last night, and I said to him, well, I'm not a doctor, so no matter how bad it gets, it's okay in the art world. I think it's good to keep a little bit of that perspective in what we do. And I think, when the stakes get too high financially in the art world, people stop having fun, they stop taking risks, they stop innovating. And there is blood in the streets. And it's not because of the art world, it's because of the time that we're living in, particularly, right now in the US, it's contentious days. And so I think, money and market aside, the innovation is needed, and the voices are needed more than ever right now. So that's what I'm focused on and thinking about.
Yeah. I was wondering for both of you, as we think about resilience and reinvention, I wonder if there are, historical examples of art dealers, gallerists, or peers today who you look to for inspiration, or who you think are great examples of resilience and reinvention.
I mean, most definitely, there's so many women within this industry that I think have paved an incredible legacy and line of reasoning in terms of how we do business within this industry. I mean, I think also to those operating today, I'm actually a huge fan of Nina's program, so it's actually quite nice to be in conversation with her here. I think of Nicola Vassal. I think of Barbara Gladstone. I mean, there's such a amazing trajectory and legacy of women and also men as well, whom have done business uh, in ways that have, completely helped pivot the market in a lot of capacities. And I think also a really important point to make, as we're thinking about a lot of the sensationalist media that has been put out in terms of art market news, is um, uh, specifically thinking about a lot of the closures that have been announced. A lot of those dealers are still very much active within the market. They may be shuttering their galleries or their physical brick and mortars, but they're still engaging and interacting within the market, still working with artists. You're still going to see them at fairs, you're still going to see them doing shows. It's just really the ideology behind how we're doing business that's the major shift.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Christiana's model. I think that this idea of, when did we get so unimaginative in the art world? Like, we have one model, we've been following it since the 1980s. Straying from it in any capacity is really frowned upon, or has been, unless it's or kind of like viewed as some kind of financially negative decision, right? So I think being more responsive to the world that we live in is necessary. And when I look back at historic models that are interesting to me, I think of people like Aeolus. I think of the great salons of the past. I think about, the art dealer as an educator, as a host, as, somebody who really welcomes you into a space to learn about an artist's practice. Somewhere along the line, that shifted into, being like very unwelcoming in a cold, unfriendly, difficult to navigate space. And we just kind of stuck to it for a long time. But, you know, even in our own network, I mean, look at Hannah Hoffman and Bridget Donahue merging. Why not? Seems great and perfectly logical and like a really inspired way to do business. And I think we as an industry need to be less rigid and really think about these new models not as you know, an indicator of a downturn in the market, but really an indicator of people wanting to live a better life, you know, a more kind of creative, interesting, less rigid life, which is why most of us are in this world to begin with, you know.
Right. Right. All right. Well, that's great. Thanks so much for setting the stage in that way. So now let's turn to each of you briefly, you know, telling us a little bit more about what you do. And you know, Christiana, maybe we could start with you. You're launching something new. I'd love to, if you could tell us about Gladwell Project. I noticed it's not called Boyle Project, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, and about, you know, what model you're pursuing and how it was inspired.
Absolutely. Well, I'm the naming behind Gladwell projects, it's specifically named after a family member of mine. So there is a name there actually. It's just not my legacy, it's someone else's. It's my late uncle who was a painter and passed away in the Biafran War. Something that I heavily considered and thought about as I wanted to launch a gallery program was thinking about legacy, continuity, and intentionality. And these are all things that, you know, I think we're always considering at some point, but also within the hubbub of trying to get through the day to day and also maximizing and building the brick and mortar and, you know, getting to a point in which we sort of move away from what the core responsibilities and reasoning behind us creating these businesses are, which is to champion artists and to build and canonize them. I really wanted to position and anchor the sort of belief and ideologies of my gallery behind his legacy. So that's the reasoning for the name. And you know, there was a time, very much so, in which I felt, you know, brick and mortar was the only way. But I think through my history and experience of working within this industry, and also seeing how incredibly globalized the art world is right now. For me, it felt, especially within the infancy of my program, to have an itinerant program was the only way to forge forward, not only for financial reasons, not only for, you know, the political landscape that we're trying to navigate, but just purely for trying to think about how to prioritize the most important parts of sustaining a gallery business, which is reaching and ensuring that you're platforming your artists as much as possible wherever they may be, but then also building community amongst collectors. So that's a huge part of the reasoning behind me creating an itinerant program and wanting to sort of build my curatorial ethos and navigating my exhibition calendar around that.
Nice. Okay, and the exhibitions, as I understand it, are taking place in a domestic setting, right? Can you tell us a little bit
They
about
are.
the Dallas
Yes.
show and the New York show coming up?
Absolutely. So the current exhibit, the curatorial series that I have launched Gladwell Projects with is called Domestic Interventions. And it's a curatorial series in which I host these exhibitions, more so institutionally scaled exhibitions within private domestic settings. So the first iteration of it was hosted in Dallas back in April during the Dallas Art Fair. It was hosted for about a week and had several artists in that exhibition: Chiffon Thomas, Nina Chanel Abney, Reginald Sylvester the second. And that was the first iteration. It was very, very successful. I was so pleased with the reach that exhibition had, especially given the community that Dallas has in terms of art collectors, artists as well. That exhibition led to an acquisition from the DMA, which was very exciting. They acquired 2 works from that show by Chiffon Thomas and also Clifford Prince King. And now the second iteration is going to open on October 3rd in Harlem, Central Harlem specifically. And it's going to be a group exhibition of about 19 artists called Spirituality of Color, in a historic brownstone that was built in, I believe, 1898, and it'll be taking over all 4 floors.
Great. I can't wait.
It's just so awesome. I mean, Brian, doesn't it? It seems so cool. Like you and I connected in advance of this talk, but I just love hearing Christiana talk about the way these programs are working and how effective they are for her artists. I mean, I do think that part of the problem with the rigidity of past models is it's not quite clear who's serving who at different points in the equation. And I think we can find ourselves, and I'm a big believer in brick and mortar. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think of myself as like a shopkeeper. It's the Dave Hickey thing. I come in, I pour my coffee, I sit at my desk, I talk to the mailman. I love that part of it. But it doesn't have to be like that for everyone, right? And I think oftentimes what you find is galleries moving through work as quickly and as kind of financially efficiently as possible so that they can cover the expenses of what it means to run a brick and mortar space today. And in that, losing the intentionality of saying, hey, this artist has a budding relationship with the DMA. Let's go there. Let's meet the people on the ground that are supporting the museum and in turn supporting the work. And, let's tell their story in really a holistic way that creates a lasting impression. And I think, patrons are really feeling the need for that in this post-COVID world as well. They want the educational piece. They don't necessarily, I think the day of shipping a crate to your storage facility and then shipping it out and never seeing the work has thankfully come and gone, and people are really, I feel, craving the other kind of, what's the word, asset of buying art, which is the connection piece, right? It's not just the object.
Yeah. And Nina, if we could stick with you for a minute, you sort of teed this up nicely. I know that part of your physical plant is actually a home that has been a residential building that has been turned into a gallery, but not a white cube. And that sort of links up with Christiana's project of showing work in people's homes and in collectors' homes. And I wonder, also, I know that part of your program is devoted to functional objects. And I wonder if you could talk about, sort of that different vibe, that different sort of presentation, because of course, as you mentioned, like the white cube sort of arrived as seemingly the industry standard and the only way to show work. And it hasn't always been, and it doesn't have to be. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think, I was in a white cube for a number of years. I was in the heart of Wynwood in a sort of nondescript warehouse space, and we just kept growing and growing in a really, just need-based way, right? We never thought about the space. We never worked with an architect. We just kept annexing whatever was next door to us to get more square footage under our belt. And what I started to find was that at the time, most of the artists I was working with were quite young, and they were feeling this need to fill the space. It was like, I need to make something that's going to feel substantial in this 5,000 square foot warehouse, as opposed to, this is the work I want to make. Let's find the space that's appropriate for it. So when I moved into this, it's kind of a little compound here in Little Haiti, what I wanted was a space that had a sense of identity that felt connected to South Florida. I didn't want to not have any windows and just fluorescent light. I wanted to be, you can see the greenery behind me now. And I wanted a space that felt that it had enough architectural dynamics that artists could respond to it over time. So we ended up with 3 distinct exhibition spaces, none of which are individually larger than 2,000 square feet, and then a garden. And what that means is artists with whom we have a long-term partnership that might be having shows with us every 2 to 3 years, there's always a different kind of space in which for them to show the work, depending on what the work that they're making needs. You know, is it more intimately scaled? Does it need natural light? Does it, you know, respond better to a wood floor or a concrete floor? And I think in turn, the way that relates to the viewer is when they come here and they look at a space or a show that's taking place in our exhibition library, they can see how this kind of performative contemporary sculpture looks when it's living on a bookshelf next to a book, which is actually the way it's going to live in their home, you know. And you know, the design part of the program, it really, I don't think of them as distinct. You know, objects kind of crept their way into the program because, you know, we started showing Betty Woodman, and I didn't know that people didn't think of Betty Woodman at that time just like a sculptor, you know, and I was pretty surprised when, first of all, most of the audience here had actually never seen Betty's work before. And second of all, that a lot of the feedback I got was, oh, well, that's craft. Who cares? I mean, I'm not, that, you know, really didn't matter to me at all. But also, to me, it was a conversation more about painting, you know. And then through Betty started showing Katie Stout and Emmett Moore and Jermaine Barnes, and it just, you know, it just kind of developed organically because artists are connected to each other and they lead you down the rabbit hole to the people that have inspired them or the people that come after them. And it's been really rewarding. I think that functional objects have a way of disarming, you know, newer collectors because we've all sat in a chair, we've all held a teacup. And so in some way, we all have a relationship to ceramics and design. And, you know, that can be a bit more approachable than, you know, Richard Serra sculpture that has no purpose by definition, you know, for folks that are kind of new to this world.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the online-offline balance, right? Galleries have to have a physical plant where people can encounter work in person, also a digital presence via social media and online. Christiana, you were at Canada and built an online presence that got you noticed and ended up in your transition to Pace. But at the same time, you know, Nina, you published this great editorial at ArtNet about how we all need to slow things down. And, you know, digital, I think, is associated with the real speeding up of the art world. You talked very eloquently about how we may have prioritized buyers over patrons and doom scrolling over dialogue in a very nice turn of phrase. And so I wonder if you could each talk about, you know, about how you see online as part of your identity, part of your work, or something that you want to prioritize or move away from. Christiana, maybe start with you.
Sure. A huge part of what I hope to be able to accomplish working within the art world is really trying to think about angles of accessibility, and how I can access viewers that may not have a formal understanding of the art world, or just specifically may not know the artist in general or of my program. A huge reason why I was so interested and have always been so interested in web and its identity and connection to the art world and how it can sort of amplify programs and artists is because it's so accessible. It's, you know, we think about Instagram, we think about even just, you know, other social media platforms, websites for galleries, and its ability, if done well, to really be able to access populations that we wouldn't necessarily come into contact with necessarily through a fair, or by word of mouth through another collector. And it was a huge part of the ethos behind, apart from within that moment going through COVID and lockdown. A huge part of me creating that online platform was thinking about the accessibility of education in terms of teaching collectors and different audiences about artists within Canada's program. It was just an ability to be able to create this context that you couldn't necessarily develop all the time within gallery exhibitions. And I've tried to really extend that ideology beyond just that online platform, and really thinking about how I engage online, whether that be on Instagram, whether that be through my website. So yeah, of course, when I went on to Pace, I worked within Web3, and expanding and starting Pace Verso, thinking about online programming at Pace as well. But it always was from the angle of education first before I thought about profit. Because I just don't think that, that's not what online is for necessarily. Of course, you're going to reach customers and you hope to make a bit more money, but it's just the opportunity to reach people in a way that you can't necessarily do IRL. That's the most alluring part of it. So, being able to find that fine balance, I think it comes into tune when you find the sweet point in terms of the why behind what you're doing, right? And what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, I think I feel so, we are a reflection of our time, right? And I think the beauty of the gallery model is that we don't have the time delay that institutions have. Many of us don't plan our programs more than a year in advance. The more nimble and new you are, sometimes it's 3 months or 6 months in advance. And I think that's a great advantage. So, I just mean kind of the broader art market and world. I think in advance of COVID, we had really kind of missed the boat. I think we really weren't great to embrace online sales, weren't really great to embrace online education. There's a lot of like gatekeeping of information, of prices, of availability, whatever, all of that. And then COVID came, and most of us adapted pretty quick. For us, that was a unique moment because being based in South Florida, we had already been accustomed to dealing with the majority of our buyers digitally, right? So even if that meant a follow-up phone call or a FaceTime video or whatever, a lot of our buyers were not physically coming in the door. And so we had to create an online experience for them that was valid. And there's something really wonderful about that because of all the reasons that Christiana just said. It opens up an audience that the artist wouldn't have access to, that we as a gallery didn't. Something that I heard that felt really reaffirming in those years kind of surrounding 2021 was, now that I'm looking at all this material digitally, I realize that actually there's no difference between the material I'm getting from Zwirner and the material I'm getting from you. It kind of created this level playing field, right? Where if everything is a PDF or a JPEG in front of you, then you really are allowed to kind of bring your own interests into the conversation in a way that all the other accoutrement of physical space and power and all of that doesn't. Right. But now, I think personally, I'm feeling that maybe we went too far and that we somehow have, missed something about desire, about profound engagement in our over eagerness to attack and kind of get in with these larger audiences. And in some ways we've like given up the goose, and I want it back a little bit. I wanna have tea one-on-one with a collector while we look at a single painting. I want to physically go to the artist studio in advance of their show. Like, I want some of that back. And so, in that editorial, my wanting to slow down was really about that, and is about that. We made the decision to now open all 3 of our exhibitions together 4 times a year, which means that now every show that's up at the gallery will be up for a period of 2 to 3 months, whereas before we were on a 6-week cycle. And that allows us to do a lot more programming, a lot more in-person engagement. It allows me and the staff time to really sit with the work and think about it, over an extended period of time. I don't know yet how to translate that effectively online, and I'm not sure we ever will. Maybe there is something about what we do that does need intimacy, and maybe that intimacy has to be done in person, and online is great for things like this. There were many thousand people subscribed, right, today, and that's amazing. But that's not the same as the conversation that we can have when we sit in the library and, smell the perfume that was made for that show. That has to happen in the space.
Right. If we could stay with you for a minute, and you're talking about doing things differently. You are a couple of years into a new arrangement where several galleries are co-representing the artist Rochelle Feinstein. I think that was announced just 2 years ago this week. And so that's with Campoli Presti, Bridget Donahue and Hannah Hoffman, who are, as you mentioned, now of the same gallery, Candice Mady and Gallery Francesca Pia. And so that's like splitting proceeds from sale as well as pooling resources to support projects. And so I wonder if you could update us on that. How's it going? What have you accomplished? And how's it?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I think it's one of the most rewarding collaborations that I have, with other dealers at the gallery. It's a very generous brain trust. I think the reason why it works is because everybody in that collective sees the bigger picture for Rochelle as an artist that, is one of the most important painters working, period, has had fantastic institutional recognition, has had fantastic recognition from her peers, including those that have kind of come up under her, younger than her, but whom the market has yet to recognize in the way she really deserves. And it takes all of us, to meet the demands of what an artist like Rochelle deserves. Hannah and Bridget did a solo presentation of Rochelle's work here in Miami. When that happened, we were able to support it with a great dinner at my home. I did a 2-person booth with Rochelle and Anna Beppes, who was her student at the Independent, and all of the collective galleries sent out those materials to their audiences. So, again, that's a space where the physical and the digital are supporting each other in a really lovely way. And, for any one of us to bring Rochelle's work to fairs 2 or 3 times a year would be quite difficult, or to support a museum show that's going around Europe and traveling to 6 different institutions. This collective means that any one of us can be there at any given moment. And it works because we all trust that the information and the kind of rising tide is shared amongst us. And it's really effective.
Nice. All right. Well, we've been chatting for a while. I've had access to you for all this time. So maybe we'll go over to audience questions. Any last thoughts before we do that, Christiana? Or should we open things up?
Well, I just wanted to quickly, it's amazing what Nina was just talking about in terms of collaboration. That's at the root of it. It's so common for galleries to represent artists collectively together, but not necessarily intentionally work together and information share, crowdfund amongst each other to support the artists. And almost sometimes feels as if there is some form of competition, which isn't serving to the artist in any capacity. Um, Something for me is I've been thinking about the growth of Gladwell, and also the programming behind it is also trying to figure out opportunities in which I can engage with either for-profits or nonprofits that are in support of the artists that I'm working with. So specifically with the first iteration of domestic interventions, I actually collaborated with a residency based out of Vermont called Eighth House. And I'd like to, it was interesting that a lot of the artists that were within that exhibition had actually passed through Eighth House's programming. So part of the proceeds from that exhibition actually were donated to Eighth House to sustain their programming for the summer. And I'd like to figure out an opportunity in which I can, in some capacity, extend that and regiment that within my programming, that to figure out a way to not only, you know, benefit the artists as it pertains to me representing them, but also thinking how that can extend to other nonprofits and for-profits that are supporting the artists besides the work that I'm doing. So, you know, as we talk about resilience and growth and ingenuity within this industry, I think it comes from all ends, you know, just trying to sort of reinvent the system in all capacities and sort of shy away from the ways in which we've worked in the past, which has been a bit siloed, you know. I think both Nina and I are definitely trying to shift and change that.
Yeah, sounds like a great example of sort of ecosystem thinking. All right. Well, John, do you want to pop back in? I'm sure the audience has
There we
tons of
go.
questions.
Pop straight back in. So we're going to start off with our first question, which is from Jack. What advice would you give to a young gallery that struggles to balance the need for sales with staying true to its ethos, especially in today's economic climate, where it often feels impossible not to prioritize sales over programming?
I have thoughts. Um, I will caution to say that you don't do anyone any favors as a gallery who can't sell anything, you know? And I think this is, it took me a long time to figure this out in the very early years of the gallery, because there is a lot of pressure to do experimental work. You know, I opened the gallery kind of at the heyday of relational aesthetics and performance-based practices, and was really sort of surprised when I opened my doors that, you know, the Guggenheim wasn't like hammering down the door to buy all the performance artists I was showing. Like, where were they, you know? But I think that the balance in our world is that the two go together, you know, and you have to lay out a timeline that works for both you and the artist financially. If you're trying to place work with an institution, that's not going to happen in 30 days. If the artist can't pay rent for the, you know, 18 months it's going to take you to make that placement, then the institution isn't going to want the work by the time the 18 months go by. So I think being really mindful about all of the moving parts, having clear timelines that both you and the artists in the program understand so that they know where the expectations lie, and being open about those conversations, you know, saying to an artist, we're expecting to sell X amount from this exhibition. This is our goal. And then checking in to say, we've met it, we're not even close, you know, whatever it is. Don't withhold that information so that you can work together. And I think that's going to give you the best result, where you don't have to sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah, reiterating what Nina is saying, which is basically emphasizing communication and also planning is so important in terms of, you know, being able to prioritize the bottom line, which is to keep your doors open and to hopefully in some capacity make a profit so you can keep showing. But to be incredibly honest with your artists in terms of what your goals are and what their goals are. It was from prior experience, what I've learned is, you know, there definitely is a balance between the two. There is the opportunity to be able to show those artists that may not necessarily drive massive profits, but you kind of just have to figure out where you can fit that in within your programming amongst artists that may be technically having more commercial success. I mean, you also just have to really pay attention to the times as well. You know, within this moment, it is a bit more difficult. You have to be a bit more honest with yourself about that. So, if you're wise in terms of ensuring that you're being communicative with the artists, you're also being realistic about your expectations and what is feasible and possible within programming, and you're being strategic. Those are that's the best that you can do. There's nothing else you can do, but just keep going.
Great. I'll move on to the next question, which is from Brianna. She says, hi there. What are the most radical visions for your projects? And what is your most radical vision for the arts economy of the future?
Well, I mean, I think my most radical vision for the art world is really trying to expand beyond the current ecosystem that we have now, and really being thinking about diversity in terms of not only artists but collectors, and thinking about whom is supporting artists, whom we are giving the opportunity to support artists. I think that there are so many collectors that are incredibly hungry but need the chance to be shepherded in some capacity. And you know, thinking about back to like the Leo Castellis and the dealers of, you know, the olden days, whom really would take their time to, you know, take collectors under their wing and heavily educate them. um you know, I think that there does need to be some form of a slowdown in terms of how we're navigating the way in which we build relationships. I think that that's the most radical way in which I could see the art world, because that's the future of it, right? People complain about the dwindling of collectors whom are buying at blue chip levels, or specifically focusing on a certain group of art or at a certain price point. But I think if the cultivation isn't there to build this whole legion of new people whom are going to support this ecosystem, then that's your issue. It's not the fact that people don't want to spend money, it's them seeing community and seeing themselves within this industry. That's what I hope I can sort of play into shifting in some capacity.
Nina, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Christiana said is spot on. You know, I mean, what's radical in our industry is, and it relates to the other question, is surviving, being honest with your artists, you know, paying your artists, don't run away with the money, like, you know, be engaged and honest with your collectors as well. I mean, that's kind of that is the radicality, and provide yourself with a sustainable you know, way of living. I mean, I think there's been an unrealistic expectation put on numerous levels of the art world, whether it's the idea that, you know, every artist 2 years out of grad school is going to be able to make work full time, not have any other source of income, and survive in perpetuity that way. I mean, that's a falsehood. You know, that's moving to Hollywood and expecting to win an Oscar in 5 years. What percentage do that? You know, the great artists that I've had the advantage of knowing in their 70s, 80s, 90s are people who have been able to survive the ups and downs of the market by, you know, teaching, by making smart investments when they have a flush market for a couple of years, by working closely with their galleries and institutions. And being honest about that, I think, is a kind of radicality in today's world, you know.
Mhm.
Great. And also, Brian, do you have any radical visions for the arts economy?
Oh, I wasn't expecting to be fielding questions here myself. I'll leave the focus on the others. I think more voices and more creativity, like Nina said, and more new kinds of models. And I co-sign that vigorously.
Great. So the next one is from Denise. What is your experience in introducing little-known artists into other cultures? How did you cultivate interest among an audience that is unfamiliar with the culture of the artists? In my case, contemporary Caribbean artists in Switzerland.
I feel like this is such a good question for Nina to first go on.
I can jump in there. I mean, I think when I opened the Gallery in Miami in 2007, it was a pretty nascent city in terms of the art market and people's familiarity with a number of artists that we showed who may have been better recognized outside of here. Jonas Mekas was one, Betty Woodman was one, Genesis Peorage was one. These were artists that in a lot of art capitals would be really well recognized by our audiences. And often here we were exposing the majority of our audiences to their work for the first time. And I think it does go to education. I mean, that is why people come to a gallery. They want to see work. They want to learn about the artist. And, I think providing intimate and approachable experiences through which to do so is the best way to do that. I mean, give people an opportunity to ask artists questions, give them an opportunity to feel, just really welcome in an environment and not intimidated by it. And I think also we have to give people time. There's a lot of impatience in the art world, but many of my favorite works are by artists who I was like totally put off by or confused by at first. And, you learn to admire and be intrigued by their work and their practice over time. So I think it's important to give audiences those opportunities as well.
I think also context of programming is so important. I think for me, and even in my earlier days working within institutions and museums, the easiest way for me to learn more about an artist was to think about how their work engages and fits into art history in some capacity. And I've sort of adapted that into the way in which I navigate my curatorial projects. So thinking about intergenerational conversations and how that sort of serves the artist in terms of, really trying to, sorry for the sirens, really trying to build knowledge and understanding in a way that, I don't want someone to just come into a space and read wall text or to see a press release. I want there to be some form of a visual connection there as well. And I think that there's a beautiful way of doing that when you have conversations with other artists and not just thinking about pairing them, whether it's aesthetic wise, but also thinking from a generational perspective.
Wonderful. The next question we have in is, as someone with a business background passionate about entering the art world, what guidance would you offer to young professionals on building resilient and impactful careers in today's rapidly evolving gallery landscape?
Oh,
That's a tough one. It's a tough one. I don't know, I think what we're saying is you have to chart your own path. I think you have to do what feels natural and honest. I don't know if this person is an artist or an aspiring dealer, like sort of what angle they're coming at it from. But, this really means different things for different people. For some artists, it means teaching. For other artists, it means not working through a gallery and selling their work directly. For some people, it means, a career in the applied arts that gives them a day job. I mean, I think staying nimble and being able to be responsive, without putting all your eggs in one basket or whatever, applies to all of the kind of various fields that we're talking about. But that answer is so personal.
Yeah, it also comes down to, like, there's so many allures to entering this industry, and so many, benefits to working within it. We're very privileged. But I think you always consistently have to be asking yourself why. Why are we doing this? Why am I interested in working within this industry? Why do I love to make work or to champion work? Um, when you can answer that, then you collectively find people that in some form can fit the ethos of your answer, and you build community around that. That's personally what I did. I tried to really surround myself, especially specifically around women whom I felt envisioned the way in which I wanted to see um, the future of the art world. And that is sort of the way in which I've forged forward in terms of building a lane for myself. Um, and I think that that is a great way of figuring out how to build a path no matter what angle you're coming in from.
I have to keep reminding myself not to listen too much. You're saying so many great things that I keep forgetting that I have to ask the question. The next question we have in is, how do you see the generational shift and wealth transfer from boomers to millennials and younger affecting your practices?
I love this question because I recently heard about this wealth shift where basically the boomer men are dying, and the greatest wealth transfer is not, in fact, to millennials, but to women. And so we're about to see the most financially empowered generation of women that we've ever seen. I mean, for me, that's great news because we've always shown a lot of female artists, like by, I don't know, not by design, just by default. And a lot of our collector base is often women. I think that that's really exciting to me, because there have been large biases in the art world that are financially driven, for race, for gender, for like basically everything you could possibly think of, for donations to museums, what that means in terms of institutional acquisitions and representation in collections. So I really do hope that helps balance some of the shifts that we're seeing societally in terms of, interest in philanthropy kind of dying down, and political support for institutions, taxpayer support for the arts, things like that. But on a very kind of small level, I think for us, we're feeling like it's quite good news.
No, I agree with you, Nina, fully. It's I think for me as well, even seeing how the landscape has changed within like the last 6 or 7 years, the collectors that have entered the space, the collectors of color whom have entered the space, whom are empowered in ways in which, 10, 15 years ago, we weren't necessarily seeing. The way that that is going to shift the canon in art history, I'm so excited to see play out before our eyes. It's also something to sort of hang on and onto within these difficult times. You got to find some positivity somewhere.
So on to the final question, because we are coming up to time. What strategies have you found most effective for engaging your audience beyond exhibitions? How do you measure audience loyalty and participation over time? There's a lot of questions in this. And are the programs or events that are constantly bring people back?
I mean, for me, the most powerful thing has always been trying to figure out opportunities in which I can come directly to community and to collectors. So whether that be, I mean, quite literally the birth of this programming series was through that, but also thinking of just situations in which it's if it's even a private dinner with collectors, and it doesn't have to be frilly and extravagant and overly expensive, just the opportunity to just take a cheap flight out to go and see someone and say invite your friends and have a conversation over dinner specifically about an artist. Or also thinking about adjacency to the buildup of a fair or the tapering off from that. I think people kind of lose sight of the power that these fairs have in terms of not only just the actual organization of it, but sort of what builds around it. You have all these people that are traveling in whom sometimes actually stay after or before. So really thinking about, you know, opportunities in which I can come to a place in which I'm not always around in, and sort of immerse myself and sort of extend and build community. That has been a very, very big help in terms of building Gladwell, and also just in terms of navigating my career prior to starting Gladwell.
Yeah, I think that just meeting people where they are and having engaged conversations. There was an interesting part of that question was, how do you track engagement, right? Like, how do you kind of, and that's our job, you know? I mean, it's our job to keep people in tune with the artists that they're interested in, to, you know, keep conversations between curators and artists moving, sometimes over decades. Now that I've had the space for 18 years, I can say that. I mean, I have had conversations with clients around artists that have gone from their very first solo show to their first museum acquisition to their first museum show. And sometimes that's been a 15-year dialogue, you know. It's a really wonderful thing to get to be part of and kind of facilitate.
I think it's a lovely place to end as we are running up to time. I want to give a massive thank you to Nina and Christiana, and also to our moderator, Brian, for today's final session on day 2. Thank you. And thank you to everybody for joining us. If you are able to join us tomorrow for day 3, our final day, we'll be kicking off tomorrow with an in-conversation with Adam Lindman, moderated by Melanie Gurmis from the Financial Times. Please do join us tomorrow, and thank you for joining this session.